If you've spent any time in peptide forums or biohacking groups, you probably heard this advice. Never take Retatrutide with your growth hormone peptide. The reasoning usually goes like this. Retatrutide increases insulin, insulin blunts growth hormone. So taking the two together must reduce your growth hormone pulse. It sounds logical. In fact, it's logical enough that many people plan their entire protocol around avoiding this supposed interaction. But here's the question. Is this actually supported by physiology, or is it a theory that's taking on a life of its own? Today, we're going to break down this argument step by step and see where the science supports it and where it doesn't. Welcome back to Kareem Optimized. If you're new here, I'm Kareem Haskett, a performance and longevity consultant and certified biohacking coach. My mission is simple: to simplify the science behind performance, longevity, hormones, peptides, and metabolic health so you can make evidence-informed decisions instead of relying on internet opinions. Today, we're discussing one of the most debated topics in the peptide community. Does Retatrutide actually interfere with growth hormone? Before we begin, this video is for educational purposes only and should not be considered medical advice. Peptides and hormone therapies may not be appropriate for everyone and should only be used under the guidance of a qualified healthcare professional when applicable. Now, let's dive in. Let's start by presenting the argument exactly as it's commonly made. Step 1. Growth hormone secretion is highest when insulin is low. Step 2. Eating carbohydrates raises insulin. Step 3. Higher insulin can reduce the amplitude of endogenous growth hormone secretion. Step 4. Retatrutide increases insulin. Therefore, Retatrutide must reduce your growth hormone pulse. Now, at first glance, that's a pretty convincing argument. The problem is, a logical argument is only as strong as its weakest assumption. So let's examine each step. So let's talk about what we know about growth hormone. We know that growth hormone isn't released continuously. It's released in pulses. The largest natural pulse usually occurs shortly after we fall asleep during deep sleep. We also know that fasting also favors increased growth hormone secretion. Why is this? Because growth hormone helps preserve lean tissue and mobilize fat during periods when nutrients are scarce. That's why growth hormone secretagogues like sermorelin, tesamorelin, CJC1295 with ipamorelin are commonly recommended on an empty stomach. This part of the theory is well supported. But what about insulin? Yep, this is another part that's generally true. A large meal, especially one with rich carbohydrates, raises insulin. And elevated insulin can reduce the normal fasting rise in endogenous growth hormone. Again, this isn't particularly controversial. So far, everything checks out. But here's where things get interesting. The next statement is where many people stop thinking. They simply say Retatrutide raises insulin. But that's an oversimplification. Retatrutide doesn't behave like injected insulin. It doesn't force your pancreas to release insulin continuously. Instead, it enhances glucose-dependent insulin secretion. That phrase is incredibly important. Glucose-dependent means its insulin's effect largely dependent on the presence of elevated blood glucose. Here's where the argument starts to lose precision. Retatrutide doesn't simply increase insulin all the time, it enhances glucose-dependent insulin secretion. That means its insulinotropic effect depends largely on the presence of glucose. During a fast, when blood glucose is generally lower and more stable, there's simply less stimulus for insulin release. And that's very different from someone walking around with chronically high insulin levels all day. This is where I think we're asking the wrong question. The question isn't whether Retatrutide can increase insulin. We know it can. The real question is whether insulin is actually elevated enough at the exact moment you're trying to stimulate a growth hormone pulse to meaningfully blunt that pulse. because the answer to that question is what may determine whether retatrutide or any GLP for that matter may have an impact on your growth hormone pulse. Now let's take this theory one step further. Retatrutide has a half-life measured in days. Just think about that for a second. If retatrutide truly kept insulin chronically elevated enough to suppress growth hormone, then anyone taking a once weekly injection would theoretically suppress growth hormone all week long. That would mean diminished overnight growth hormone pulses every single night, which means impaired natural physiology around the clock. But that's not what we observe clinically, and it isn't supported by the available human evidence. Another piece people forget is that GLP-1 based therapies often improve fasting insulin sensitivity, glucose control, and metabolic health. Those aren't characteristics we'd expect if someone were constantly hyperinsulinemic. In many people, their fasting insulin actually improves over time. That's another reason the retatrutide equals constantly high insulin argument falls apart. So now let's talk specifically about growth hormone secretagogues. Many clinicians still recommend taking them in a fasted state, away from large meals, and often before bed. Does that make physiological sense? Yes, it does. Trying to maximize your body's natural growth hormone pulse is a reasonable strategy. But that's different from saying retatrutide blocks the peptide from working. Those are two very different claims. Simply put, based on what we currently know, there's no convincing evidence that retatrutide meaningfully eliminates or kills your growth hormone pulse through chronic insulin elevation. Could meal timing matter? Possibly. Could taking a growth hormone peptide immediately after a large carb-heavy meal reduce the response? Potentially. But does that automatically mean your weekly retatrutide injection is preventing your growth hormone peptide from working? At least based on the evidence we currently have, we can't make that conclusion. Now there's a bigger lesson in play here. This discussion teaches an important lesson about physiology. Sometimes we combine two true statements, such as growth hormone is influenced by insulin and retatrutide can enhance insulin secretion. We connect them together and assume the conclusion must also be true. But biology isn't simply math. Context matters. Timing matters. The magnitude of the response matters. And the body's regulatory systems are far more complex than a single cause and effect relationship. So let's summarize this up. Growth hormone secretion is naturally higher during fasting. Large meals can reduce endogenous growth hormone secretion. Retatrutide enhances glucose-dependent insulin secretion rather than continuously elevating insulin. And there's currently no strong human evidence showing that retatrutide suppresses growth hormone pulses in the way often claimed online. Last but not least, taking growth hormone peptides in a fasted state remains a reasonable strategy, but that doesn't mean retatrutide renders them ineffective. Now don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with optimizing timing. The mistake is assuming optimization and necessity are the same thing. If you found this video helpful, I'd really appreciate if you hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments. What peptide, hormone, or longevity topic would you like me to break down next? And if you're trying to navigate the world of performance and longevity optimization, I built KareemOptimize.com to simplify the process. It's my one-stop educational resource where you can learn about different optimization pathways and explore trusted partners for everything from bioactive wellness products, physician-prescribed therapies, and research compounds, to blood work resources, DEXA scans, and other tools that support your health and performance goals. And if you're not sure where to start, request your free personalized performance protocol. I'll help point you toward the pathway that best aligns with your goals. Remember, don't confuse a popular theory with established physiology. The goal isn't to follow trends. The goal is to understand how the body actually works. I'm Kareem Haskett, and this is Kareem Optimized. Optimize your physiology, elevate your performance. I'll see you in the next video.